Hi, welcome. Let us discuss about a design case study. Object-oriented design case study is very, very important as you see the real life. In real life, we have lots of problems and every problem has a description. But how do we find a object-oriented model from a description? This case study is going to, explain you every detail of it. For example, take a look at this problem. Customer is a user. Every user has user ID and password. Customer has name and email. Book is an item. Every item has item ID and price. Book has title and ISBN number. Customer buy book on a date and quantity. That means customer buys specific number of book and on a particular date. Customer has credit card. Credit card has number and balance. Suppose this is a problem. You see, in this problem, when you're reading, you have to identify three things. One is the class, number one. You're identifying class. And then you're identifying attribute. That's very important. That means when you are reading a problem, you have to identify class, you have to identify attribute, and the third most important thing is the relationship. So in this problem, what we'll look for is every possible noun is noun I'm talking about. Every possible noun is either a class or an attribute. Let's start with the first line. Customer is a user. So we can understand customer is a noun, possibly class. Is a relationship, we know. It means inheritance. So we identify that customer and user, there is an inheritance, and this inheritance is identified by reading this line. That means wherever you are reading something is a, that means it is an inheritance. Now, so now you talk about every user has user ID and password, but you can understand when you say every user, that means that we are talking about all users in the system. Has is a kind of course, association, but when we see user ID and password, what we see is that user ID and password is attribute. And every user, that means this user ID and password must go to user, and it's actually protected attribute. Protected why? Because every user has user ID and password. Very good. Alright, so let's proceed. What we see in the next line is customer has, that means association again, name and email. We know name and email is a unique value. It's an attribute, it cannot be class. Every noun is a class, but if that is a unique value, that actually is a attribute. So what we see is customer has two attributes, name and email. Fine. Let us proceed. Book. We can understand book is a noun, is a possible class, is an item. There is a relationship, another inheritance between book and item. Item is a class. So we mark them actually with a teal line, you can see here. So book is an item, we can understand that item actually is a book and there is an inheritance relationship. Again we see that every item has, that means this is an association, item ID and price. That means item ID price actually is an attribute and it is going to every item. So it is going to be protected attribute in which class? In item class. Fine. Now we look at the next line. Book has title and ISBN number. So has is association, that means title and ISBN number, actually is these two attribute is with the book. Very nice. Let us proceed. We will see the next line, customer buy book. That means customer and book, these are two class already. And they have a relationship called buy, but buy is actually an association relationship. On a date, that means when you are actually buying, you give a date and quantity, that how many books you are buying. Fine. Up to now we understand that how do we identify attribute, how do we identify class, how do we identify relationship. Next line what we see is that customer has, you can see here, customer has credit card. So customer has credit card means you're talking about there is another class, credit card and customer. These two has a relationship, association relationship. Credit card has association again, number and balance. Actually this should be balance. So number and balance, and this, understand that credit card has number and balance, these two attribute. Alright, so what we have to do now, when we read this description, we have identified the class, relationship, attribute, everything. What we have to do is we have to create an object-oriented model, that is a class diagram, and once we have the class diagram we can implement using Java. So every project actually you do this analysis to come up with a object-oriented model which is a class diagram, and then finally you write down the code to implement your application. Here I have shown that is a inheritance relationship, as is association. It can be class or it can be attribute. So let us proceed to see the model. Alright, this is the model what we see here. How many class we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 class. So we have 6 different classes. Start with the user. You can see here what happens in the user class. Here you have this class name, but you consider these two attributes, you can understand that they are protected. Why? Because we said that this user ID and password, every user has user ID and password. So user class has user ID and password. They are of type protected, and you have constructor and the display method. The next line what you see is what we say, customer is a user. So this is actually is a relationship. Customer is a user. There is an inheritance, and customer has name and email. We can see it clearly. We have a constructor and display method. Display and constructor is always common, so you try to provide them. So I came up to here that customer is a user. Fine. The next thing that we see is book is the item. So item, again another class coming, and every item has item ID and price. So we put them as a protected data method. And then we have the item constructor and the display method. What we say is a book is a item. Book is an item, so there is an inheritance, again is a coming, is a relationship, and this is inheritance, and book has title and ISBN number. Very nice. Book has its constructor and a display method. As you said that customer buy book, this is actually association, you can understand, and the name of this association actually is buy. And I put a dotted line to indicate that buy will be a class. Why? Because you said customer buy book on a date and quantity. So the date and quantity, this quantity actually is a negative, it's private. So date and quantity both are actually private member of buy class. You have a constructor and you have a display method. Finally, you say that customer has credit card. So there is an association again, has, and you have a credit card, you have 2 data member, credit card number and the balance, and there is a constructor and the display method. So what you see in the object-oriented model, this is the class diagram, but this class diagram actually is the ultimate model, the architecture of your software. So in this model, what we have seen, we have